Every Thursday morning, Walter Thornfield liked to stand in the doorway of the break room and remind whoever was listening that real leadership can't be taught. It has to be inherited. And I had learned to keep my eyes on my coffee whenever he said it. I had married into the Thornfield Freight Company 4 years earlier, and in that time I had rebuilt its entire Western distribution network from a tangle of missed shipments into the most profitable division in the building. Yet Walter still introduced me at company dinners as my son's better half, rather than by my actual title. My name is Maren Voss, and for 4 years I ran operations for a man who thought loyalty meant showing up early and leaving quietly, while he handed out corner offices to anyone who shared his last name or his golf handicap. I had negotiated a private freight corridor with Alden Rail Partners that no one else at Thornfield could even get a phone call returned for, and I had done it while simultaneously training 3 junior coordinators and covering for a warehouse manager who thought inventory audit was a suggestion rather than a job requirement. Nobody applauded any of it because in Walter's mind, competence from a daughter-in-law was simply what he was owed for letting me keep my seat at the table. The trouble started on a golf course, the way most quiet betrayals in that family seemed to, when Walter came home glowing about his old fraternity brother's nephew, a fresh business school graduate named Preston Vance, who had a real spark for logistics. Within 2 weeks, Preston had a window office and a laptop stipend, while I was still working off the secondhand monitor I'd bought myself the year I started. And on his 3rd day, he wandered over to ask me with total sincerity how to open the shared drive that housed every vendor contract I had personally built from nothing. I smiled, told him the drive was organized by instinct more than folders, and quietly decided that if Walter wanted to hand someone the keys to a kingdom, he could hand them the keys to a kingdom I had never fully unlocked for anyone but myself. Rumors of a massive new initiative called Project Horizon began circulating a few weeks later, a plan to consolidate every regional freight contract under one streamlined system, and I recognized it instantly because I had drafted the entire framework months earlier during long nights after my husband had gone to bed. My team had already piloted a version of it that cut delivery delays by 19%. And when my husband came home one night grinning and told me his father was seriously impressed with what I had built, that same stubborn hope I always regretted having flickered back to life for one more painful evening. I told myself, against every lesson experience had already taught me, that maybe this time the work itself would finally be enough to earn the recognition I had spent years quietly chasing. The announcement meeting came with catered pastries, which anyone at Thornfield could tell you was always a warning sign rather than a celebration, and I took my usual seat near the middle of the table where I had long ago learned to make myself both present and forgettable. Walter clicked through a slide titled Project Horizon, a bold new era, in a font so garish it looked like a ransom note, and then, without once glancing in my direction, announced that Preston would be stepping in as interim director of strategic growth. The silence that followed was the kind that presses against your eardrums, a room full of people recalculating exactly how much their own hard work was worth in a company that measured value by bloodline instead of results. I didn't argue, and I didn't cry in the parking lot the way some version of me from years earlier might have, because I had already spent that week quietly transferring the sole vendor liaison clause on our largest supplier contract into my own name under a routine renewal I had authored myself. That evening, I typed a single sentence onto a blank page, printed it, and left it sealed in an envelope on Walter's desk the next morning. I, Maren Voss, am resigning effective in 2 weeks, delivered with the same calm tone I used to explain expense reports to new hires. He asked if this was about the promotion, and I told him quite honestly that it was about every year before it that had led to this particular Tuesday. 2 weeks later, I was gone. And within a month, the cracks had already begun spreading through the company like frost across a windshield, starting with a supplier named Alden Rail Partners, who flatly refused to process new orders from anyone other than the liaison listed on their contract. Preston, unaware that clause even existed, spent an entire afternoon calling every number on LinkedIn with the word logistics in the title, before finally admitting defeat to a room that had already stopped believing in him. Meanwhile, a mid-tier client called Brennan Industrial quietly reached out to my new consulting firm, having heard through the grapevine that the person who actually understood their account had left the building for good. By the second month, Thornfield's board had started requesting weekly performance reports instead of the polished quarterly summaries Walter preferred, because the numbers behind Project Horizon had begun bleeding money in ways nobody in the building could adequately explain. A leaked recording from a client call captured Preston stumbling through a basic licensing question, admitting on record that he wasn't entirely sure who legally owned the intellectual property the entire project was supposedly built on, and that recording spread through the office faster than any company memo ever had. I heard about it from a former colleague who still texted me updates, always signing off with some version of, "You'd have loved this one," and for the first time in years, I let myself laugh without feeling guilty about it. Walter finally called me himself on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. His voice dipped in the kind of warmth he only used when he needed something, asking if I might consider coming back just temporarily to help smooth things over. I told him I was consulting full-time now and that any arrangement would need to reflect my actual market value, and when he asked what that value looked like, I sent him a proposal with a rate triple my old salary and a 90-day minimum retainer attached. He signed it within 24 hours, and I taped the confirmation email to the wall above my new desk, right next to a framed photo of the modest but entirely mine office suite I had built from scratch. The real reckoning arrived when Brennan Industrial, one of Thornfield's largest and oldest clients, called an emergency meeting with the board to announce they were terminating their contract entirely unless I personally returned to manage the account. Walter tried to spin it as strategic realignment to anyone who would listen, but the numbers didn't lie, and Brennan alone represented nearly a fifth of the company's total quarterly revenue walking out the door in a single afternoon. Legal counsel later discovered, buried in the exit paperwork Walter himself had signed without reading closely, that I had legally retained rights to every framework and vendor system I had personally authored, meaning the company had been running on borrowed infrastructure it no longer had any legal claim to. I watched from across a crowded industry gala months later as Walter stood near the entrance, visibly thinner and quieter than the man who once filled every room he entered with unearned certainty, while I sat at a table signing a new six-figure partnership with a firm his own company had spent a year failing to close. He caught my eye for just a moment, and I offered him nothing more than a small, genuine nod before turning back to my new colleagues, because I had long since stopped needing his approval to know exactly what I was worth. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only the quiet satisfaction of watching a man finally understand, far too late, that the people who build empires rarely stay invisible forever. If this story resonated with you, know that stories like Moran's happen every day in offices where hard work gets overlooked and true worth eventually finds its way to the surface. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.